Hi, my name is Ken Davidian, and welcome to Season 2 of Organization Theory in Space. In this season, I'm making a brief video for each of the 36 chapters in the Oxford Handbook of Organizational Change and Innovation, second edition, edited by Marshall Scott Poole and Andy Van de Ven. This video covers Chapter 22 of the Handbook, entitled Microfoundations of Innovation as Process, Usher's Cumulative Synthesis Model. In this chapter, we'll provide an historic and material overview of Usher's model of cumulative synthesis, including a section on its underlying assumptions, its influence on contemporary scholars, and how it can be used to enhance the scholarship and practice of innovation. We'll end with suggestions for future research. I wanted to take a second to distinguish between the terms innovation and invention. The chapter notes that Usher's notions go beyond invention, and include everything that occurs during the process of innovation. In the chapter, the term innovation refers to an emergent process that includes every event, every action, and every invention along the way. Usher was a historian in the early 20th century who asked the question of how do new things happen? At the time, Usher encountered two predominant invention and innovation theories. The first attributed innovation to massive and independent invention, referred to as the inspiration of genius, that admits of no analysis. Usher referred to this theory as transcendentalism. He also called it naive and ill-grounded. The second theory, this one supported by sociologists, described invention and innovation as a process over time. Usher was unsatisfied by this theory because he thought it was too mechanistic, with innovations proceeding under the stresses of necessity. Usher was a contemporary with Joseph Schumpeter, who proposed the linear model of invention, innovation, and diffusion. Usher perceived this model to be overly idealized and unrealistic because it did not reflect how the innovation process progressed based on his research. Usher also thought Schumpeter underestimated the level of novelty and skill involved to create what he called secondary and tertiary inventions. Usher's response to these other theories was a middle ground between the indeterministic transcendentalism and the deterministic sociological theories. Usher proposed that insight was neither rare nor a simple response to unmet goals. He proposed a generalized process model of cumulative synthesis that he based on his in-depth studies covering 100 years of history of many mechanical innovations. Some of these mechanical innovations included locomotives, manufacturing processes, the Bessemer steelmaking process, and a bunch of others. Usher's model included 4 steps: the perception of an unsatisfactory pattern, stage setting, a primary active insight, and critical revision and development of the innovation. Unlike the transcendental theory, Usher contended that all 4 steps, not just the primary active insight, required skill and acumen. The first step, perception of an unsatisfactory pattern, requires the ability to see beyond deeply embedded normative beliefs and mechanisms that may not be meeting expectations in some way, which also may contradict the pressures of social compliance. Before the primary active insight is achieved, a configuration of events and thought must be created and perceived, and this is the step of setting the stage. Setting the stage is not simple blind variation, but a confluence of ideas and objects that result in fortuitous and serendipitous findings. The influence of varying amounts of acumen and skill in this step can generate different possible outcomes based on the different stage settings. These fortuitous outcomes are reflected in the third step, the primary act of insight. Finally, the fourth step of critical revision and development, which Usher called critical revision and full mastery, solves the new problems introduced by the invention or innovation, requiring new acts of insight. After the major act of insight, the fourth step injects and interlaces many minor acts of insight and skill to the innovation's evolution. Ultimately, all 4 steps occur simultaneously and not in a linear fashion, so this means that the search concepts of exploration and exploitation also occur simultaneously as part of the innovation process instead of as individual and distinct processes. Usher also distinguished between different types of invention. Primary inventions generated a new base of knowledge and have no immediate practical use, or what he might call use cases. Secondary inventions open up areas of new and practical use for that invention. Tertiary inventions were those that extended an existing use case identified by a secondary invention. Usher's model describes how change occurs by assuming three action modes: innate activities, acts of skill, and inventive acts of insight. Innate activities and acts of skill are both unlearned activities, although innate activities do not change the surrounding context or artifacts, whereas inventive acts of insight do. Acts of skill are learned activities, in contrast to the other two types of actions. Acts of insight create change, discontinuities, and resistance, and this results in new constructive acts of synthesis, answering the question of why change occurs. The relevance of relationality in Usher's model refers to the question of how can the stage be set for an invention? Usher's research led to the concept of readiness, or what he called ripeness, in the innovation process. Individual and societal contexts prepare the state of mind that can allow insights when different elements of an invention are co-presented. Usher was aware of experiments conducted in 1925 where different configurations of a stick and a banana were presented to caged chimpanzees that allowed them to reach the banana even though it was farther away than their arms could reach without the stick. The concept of readiness means that these serendipitous stage settings might occur frequently, and if opportunities to identify the invention is missed on one occasion, another opportunity may soon present itself elsewhere. Example of this include the independent but almost simultaneous invention by different individuals, as was the case with Newton and Leibniz, both inventing calculus in the mid-17th century. The third assumption, the role of temporality, reinforces that Usher's model is not simply a linear set of progressive steps. Usher identified major nodes in the innovation process, something he called strategic inventions, and the emergence of these nodes are not strictly driven by chronologic time or chronos, but are better represented by kairos, opportune moments when people, events, and contexts are ripe for acts of insight. A third concept of time, ion, refers to cyclic patterns that are also represented in Usher's model. Regarding the assumption about the patterns of change, Usher's model incorporates communication between individuals. That communication is used to pass along techniques and best practices that are, at every generation, recreated by the younger practitioner, introducing variations and novelties, effectively recreating the previous pattern with imperfections and improvements. These patterns are not inherited from one generation to the next, but recreated. This means that practical knowledge does not descend from older to the newer generations, but it is recreated at each interface. This is the basis for the cumulative synthesis of Usher's model, that small variations contribute over a long period of time to significant inventions through the innovation process. Finally, Usher's ontological assumptions include substantive metaphysics, where major inventions and events can be placed in chronological order to explain how the innovation process unfolds, but Usher also includes process metaphysics, where innovations is an unfolding journey that results in material objects along the way. The authors of this chapter assert that Usher's model falls into both ontological camps. Innovation can be both a noun, the substantive position, and a verb, the process position. The authors assert, however, that these two ontological positions are like Heisenberg's principle, which says it's possible to know one well at the cost of increased uncertainty of the other. This means that the better one understands the innovation object, the less well one understands the innovation process. When considering the use of Usher's model for research, the authors assess the model's limitations, its principles, and the current state of research related to it. The model is very comprehensive in its scope. However, the authors note that it is overly retrospective and could benefit from a forward-facing or projective perspective. This may be understandable since Usher was a historian, but the role of imagination and future expectations could be reinforced in the innovation process as currently described in the model. Regarding research-based principles of change in the model, the authors note the similarity of Usher's work and the result of the 1967 study sponsored by the National Science Foundation to identify critical events leading up to major technological innovations. The findings of the newer study, called Traces, state that mundane innovations played major roles in the creation of significant innovations. These findings are reminiscent of Usher's model. The authors next point to their own work to show how current research is building on Usher's foundations. Finally, the discussion of methodological implications includes the use of narratives to explore the innovation process for a lot of reasons I'm not going to go into here for the sake of time. But in addition to narratives, another way to analyze innovation process is by exploring developmental patterns within and across individuals. Sequences are based on between-person differences, which can include unitary and multiple progressions, within-person differences, which can be simple or cumulative, and relations of developmental elements, which can be conjunctive or disjunctive. This method provides for a formal way to describe and explore the innovation process pathways. Well, that's it for chapter 22 of the handbook. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you're interested in this channel, please subscribe or hit that notification bell to make sure that you get notified when the new videos come out every week. Thanks. OT in Space was produced by IRL, which stands for Impossible Research LLC. IRL conducts process research on the topics of innovation and industry emergence within the space sector context. IRL also offers services of organization theory consulting, research consulting, and STEAM outreach. This video is intended for educational purposes only.